Well, good evening, and welcome to Kopernik. My name is Drew Desker. I'm the director here at Kopernik. It's great to have you here with us in person. I also want to welcome those watching on the live stream on our YouTube channel. And before we get started, I always do a very quick survey. Who is here for the first time or hasn't been here since their 4th grade field trip? All right, one person, okay. Who here are members? All right, pretty much everybody else, which is great. I sort of point that out because, especially for those watching on the live stream, a Kopernik membership actually has some pretty significant value. I mean, not only does it support what we do here at Kopernik, but it gives you an opportunity to reach out and actually engage in similar places literally around the world. But so we belong to what's called the ASTC, Association of Science and Technology Centers. And a Kopernik membership gets you into 387 other science centers. So you can go to Roberson for free. You could go to the Museum of Science and Technology up in Syracuse, the Intrepid Museum down in New York City, the Franklin Institute down in Philly. And very often you'll find out that if it's just a pair of adults go in, the cost of 2 adults getting into that venue is more expensive than a 1-year membership here. And plus you get to skip the line of people buying their tickets. So another benefit from it. Kopernik is actually celebrating its 50th anniversary this year. It opened in 1974, and we actually will be doing a fairly major gala down at the Doubletree in October, where we will have a Nobel Prize-winning chemist, Dr. Stanley Whittingham. Sir Dr. Stanley Whittingham will be our keynote speaker. And we'll be also talking about sort of the next 50 years for Kopernik. Where are we headed? And inviting you to join us on that journey. But again, Kopernik's been around for 50 years. And we are a public observatory. And we are an informal STEM education facility. We aren't really, we're not connected with any universities, so it's memberships, it's admissions for Friday nights. When school programs come up here, that's how we do what we do. And so let me give you a little bit of background. So again, right now we're actually in the middle of our summer camp programs, and so we just finished a couple of camps just a couple of hours ago on sort of super science discovery for younger students, and we actually have another session in August. So if you know any rising 2nd and 3rd graders that come up for a camp, that's available. We also did a camp on virtual reality today. Finished up here. Next week we're actually doing a camp called Welcome Aboard the International Space Station, and it's for again, rising 5th and 6th grade students, where students are going to learn what kind of work, what kind of training astronauts go through, what kind of work they do on the ISS. We'll talk about satellite orbits and radio communication, and our students will actually have an opportunity to ask a question of an astronaut currently on the International Space Station using the ham radio station we have here. So actually, this coming Wednesday, Dr. Jeanette Epps, who is a Syracuse native and actually has been here to Kopernik, is going to be at the other end of the microphone, as it were, and our students will get a chance to ask questions of Dr. Epps as she's flying by at 17,500 miles an hour. And by the way, this evening at about 9:45 or so, there will be practically an overhead pass of the ISS. So not to put any limits on our speaker tonight, but what I will say is that there have been times when we've actually said, okay, we're going to pause the talk, go out, watch the ISS fly by, and then come back in and finish the talk. But I'll keep my remarks short so we can move on. But anyway, so you can always go to our website and it'll tell you what's coming up. We'll always tell you what's coming up next week. Actually, we will have public programs. So next week is actually somebody from the Cornell Astronomy Department. Zoe Lerner-Pontario, manager of the Spacecraft Planetary Imaging Facility. She's talking about 10 years of space exploration. We've got, we always do, in advance of the Perseid meteor shower, we always do a comets and meteors talk. And of course, we will be open for the Perseid meteor shower on any clear nights. But then, after that, we're going to do a talk on straw bale building and using sort of natural materials from an architecture standpoint. So there's always good stuff coming up. But again, one of the things I really love about Kopernik is an opportunity to sort of expand our knowledge on things. It's not everything we talk about is about astronomy, and tonight's program is sort of an example of that. It's really an opportunity for us to continue lifelong learning. So any of you younger people, I was going to say we had a couple younger people in here earlier. They're out in the hobby lobby. But learning really should be something you do your entire life. And I was telling our speaker, I really wish I could live another 50 or 60 years just to see where technology progresses. I tell my kids, when I was your age, I used to have to walk to the TV to change the channel. And there are only 3. And so who knows how this is going to play out. But again, we're very, very fortunate to have our speaker this evening. Dave Nicosia from the National Weather Service is the meteorologist-in-charge. And so he's spoken on a number of other topics, but we recently discovered that Dave is a big birder. And his talk is now going to sort of talk about how his job affects things he loves. So Dave Nicosia, please join us.
Okay, how's that? Good? All right. Oh, it's a nice screensaver. All right. It disconnected me. Yeah. Hopefully it remembers. Yeah. All right, that should work. There we go. There we go. Okay, well, I'd like to thank Drew and Kopernik Observatory for having me tonight. I love this place. And I was looking at some of those summer camps. They didn't have any of that stuff when I was a kid. My gosh, I would have been all over that, The kid, the youngsters these days, they got it's a lot of opportunities, so. But yeah, tonight I have an opportunity to bring 2 passions of my life since I was a little boy. Weather and birds, and I'm going to bring it together. So I've been interested in weather, oh gosh. I remember in kindergarten I was just fascinated by how the temperature changed every day, and then some days it could rain and other days it could be sunny. So I was very interested in weather. And then also, about probably the same year, kindergarten, 1st grade, we had a cardinal nest right by the front of our house. And cardinals are really pretty, and I just was like, wow, this is so cool. So I just got very interested in birds too. And that was back in the late 70s, and people were starting to feed birds. And I had a neighbor that had an incredible bird feeder, and the neighbor also happened to be my piano teacher. So I would go over for my piano lesson, believe me, I'm not very musical, I was forced. But I would want to spend, after the lesson, I would sit and Mom would want to come and pick me up. She said I could stay for an hour, and I would stay and just watch the bird feeder, and like all these different birds are coming to the feeder, and there's bird books, and I started really learning, and then of course my parents got a bird feeder, and it just took off. And I grew up in Athens, Pennsylvania, so it's not that far from here. Yeah, Athens, Pennsylvania, right. And it was up, in a rural area in the woods, so there's lots of birds and everything. And I just got very interested in that. Plus, I'm on top of a mountain, right? So that's where I grew up. And boy, did I have a good view of the weather too. So it's like I had the best of both worlds. And I'm very lucky, and Drew kind of mentioned it too. I'd love to live another 50, 100 years and see what transpires as well, but I've been very lucky because I've been passionate about these two things from a very young age, and I still am today. And that's, I feel very lucky about that. So I feel like a very rich man in that regard. So, so as Drew said, I'm the meteorologist-in-charge at our National Weather Service here in Binghamton. I went to Penn State University, got my bachelor's and master's at Penn State. And then I started working in the Weather Service in the early 90s. So I have 33 years in. I am eligible to retire next year. Yeah, well, no, but see, here's the thing. Why would I retire from something that I enjoy? It's not worth. If you do something you enjoy, and some of you younger folks, and I get paid, right, exactly. Like I feel like I don't go to work. I go to have fun, because I enjoy my job. So, and my hobby has been bird watching, and through the years, I've gotten, I've done a lot with birds too, and especially since the mid-2000s, I took a class at the Cornell Laboratory of Ornithology, spring field ornithology. And boy, that took me to another level of birding. And then eventually got to a point where I was a field leader. So I did that for many years. I would lead bird trips, and I still occasionally do. So, and then another thing that happened was being part of the National Weather Service, we have access to our radar data. So back in the mid to late 90s, when we deployed our Doppler radar, again, this is almost 30 years ago, this is before the internet, as Drew was mentioning, this is before we had all this great stuff. I had access to radar data, and we found that our radar could see birds migrating. So I had a couple PhD students in ornithology back then that I was working with, getting them the radar data they needed to do studies. And now all these guys are high up in the field. One of them he's in charge of the Cape May Audubon's, the bird observatory in Cape May. So it's like I know all these folks, and especially at Cornell too. I know quite a few folks at the lab. And so I've gotten involved in some research. Just little bits of things. There's a lot more I'd like to do. So what I'm going to share with you tonight is how both of my passions actually work together. And it's very, very interesting. It's stuff that we learned just by chance, and we've been exploring, and there's a lot more questions too. So we'll go over that. And we'll talk a little bit about climate change, and I also want to talk about green energy. Again, some of these, especially when we get to green energy, this is my opinion, okay? But I got to show you some things that I'm concerned about. But anyway, all right, I already kind of went through all this, so I discussed this. So I just like to talk. I don't like to read from slides. You guys could read very well, so I'll move on. So weather patterns and bird migration. So we'll talk a little bit about weather first, and then I'll talk about how the bird migration and vagrancy. You know what vagrancy is? So when birds get off course. Oh, and one thing I did want to ask, how many people here are really interested in birds? I mean, I know you are. Okay. How many people have that Merlin app and are starting to learn about birds? If you get that Merlin app from Cornell, it's incredible how many birds that are out there, and they're beautiful. And the app, it's free. It's a free app that Cornell offers. It's just called Merlin, M-E-R-L-I-N. And you get the app on your phone, and you just put it outside, turn it on, and it listens and it records all the birds, and it tells you, using artificial intelligence, what birds, it's not 100% accurate, but it gives you an idea of what you have. And it's amazing. People come to me and they're like, I can't believe it. Some of these birds are very pretty, but they're in the trees and they're hard to see. And I think it's proliferating bird watching because people don't realize, like some people will come to me and say, birds, that's kind of boring. I mean, why would you watch birds? I keep saying, well, you have no idea what you're missing, right? You have no idea what you're missing. So, all right, so let's talk a little bit about weather. I mean, just some basic weather. Highs and lows. People are familiar with weather maps in general, right? I mean, I remember when I was a kid, people weren't, but now, with all this, areas of low pressure, the wind. Oh, I knew it. I told you I was going to do that because this looks like forward to me. I'm fine. All right, so let me get the pointer. And so around low pressure, the winds turn counterclockwise. So ahead of a low pressure, you got south winds. Behind a low pressure, like here over Colorado, you'd have north winds, okay? So that's how the winds blow around our highs and lows, okay? And it's areas with maximum or minimum pressure relative to surroundings, okay? So low pressure generally are our storms. They are our storms, right? And high pressure, like we're going to have this weekend, finally, right? I mean, this summer, gosh, it seemed like it would rain every weekend and then it'd be beautiful on Monday. You're just like, oh my gosh, I'm sitting in my office looking out the window like, oh, what the? So one time I actually don't like working because there's nothing going on in the weather, so it's boring, and I'm in my office. But anyway, it is what it is. And then these lines are what are called isobars, areas of equal pressure. So again, this is like a typical weather map. All right, oops, let me go back. So around low pressure, the air is rising, coming in and rising and going up. So air that's rising, it cools by expansion. As you get up in the atmosphere, there's less air, it expands, it cools, and any moisture that's in it condenses out. You form clouds. Clouds form, and the deeper the clouds get, you get precipitation. And if it's cold enough, we get snow. So that's a little ways away. And then high pressure is the opposite. The air is sinking. So the air warms by compression. So it warms, so any moisture in it evaporates out. So that's what we're going to have this weekend. It's going to be beautiful. Low humidity, nice. I mean, we're going to have just beautiful weather. So that's highs and lows. Now let's talk about fronts. A cold front is a leading edge of advancing cold air mass. We just had a cold front pass through because remember how humid and warm it was? And now today was really nice, wasn't it? We had a cold front pass through yesterday. So it took that humid air with it and passed it off to the south and east. And now we have this cooler air mass, which is the coming down with this high pressure system. At the surface, fronts mark where cold air overtakes and replaces the warm air. In the summer, we get thunderstorms and severe weather, and boy, we've had a lot of that. Whew. It's been a busy summer for us. In the winter, we often get hazardous weather, like, you get snow squalls, lake effect. Sometimes we can get dramatic changes. So here's an example. The cold air comes in, displaces the warm air, and you get the clouds. That's a typical cold front. All right. Warm fronts. The edge of advancing warm air mass is a warm front. Now, if you think about it, cold air is dense relative to warm air, okay? And you can see this in the winter time very often. If you got the heat on in your house, right? And it's 0 out and you open the door, cold air goes to your feet, right? That's where it goes first, right? Cold air is dense, so it wants to, it just sits there. So warm air comes in when you have a warm front and it overrides the cold air mass, and eventually it erodes it at the boundary. I'll show you. So generally, it brings precipitation, light, moderate, steady precipitation, moves slowly. So the warm air goes over the top of the cold air, and that's a warm front. Okay. The one thing about cold fronts or warm fronts is the air is what we call stable or laminar. You've heard of laminar flow. It's very stable flow. Right, very stable. Cold fronts, on the other hand, are the opposite. You get very turbulent flow. Okay, and that's very important. I'll talk about that in a little bit. And warm fronts tend to move more slowly. But you tend to have more laminar flow with this. And that's important for birds. So I'll get back to that. So this is an example of spring migration. And this is from a while ago, but it's a great example. So what we have here, make sure I don't turn this off. Okay. So birds, songbirds in particular, migrate at night. There are billions of songbirds. Just, they're insanely abundant. And they migrate at night. Why do you think they migrate at night? Less predators. In fact, the hawks do not see them at night. So yes, they avoid the hawks. Hawks migrate during the day. So a lot of the birds will take off right after sunset. So this is what we're seeing. The sunsets and all these radar echoes in here, there's no precipitation in these areas. These are birds heading north. There's a low pressure system here. There's your cold front. There's your warm front, right? And there's south winds here. And all the birds, this is spring migration, so all the birds are taking advantage of these south winds. So they're going up to anywhere from 1,000, 3,000, 4,000 feet up, right in the winds north. Because a lot of our birds in the summertime that we have now around us, winter, believe it or not, in Central and South America. So they have long ways to go. So when you see this pattern during migration, this is not raining in those places. Those are birds. And if you think about it, birds are made of 90% of what? Water. Right? What does our radar like to pick up? Water. So, we started seeing this back in the 90s, like, wow, we're seeing bird migration. So you can see how the birds migrate at night. And this just completely fascinates me. And what really fascinates me is the birds coming across the Gulf of Mexico. Look at that. They're just coming across the Gulf of Mexico. They're not stopping. They're going right across the Gulf of Mexico, and they're not stopping. And these are little songbirds that are about this big, a few ounces, really small. And they fly all the way across the Gulf of Mexico. And they're making it, and they have room to spare. They're not landing as soon as they get to the coast. Now, if the weather's bad, if there's thunderstorms and rain, they will land as soon as they get to shore. And once in a while, you get a thunderstorm complex that goes down into the Gulf and kills millions of birds. It's natural. I mean, yeah, it's sad. And they'll all wash up on shore, and I would not want to walk on the beach on a day like that, because you have all these beautiful songbirds that are, and it's Mother Nature, But there's so many birds, this migration has been going on for a long time, a long, long time. So this was a similar day. So this is what we have. So you get your high pressure, right? Clockwise flow around high pressure, counterclockwise flow, south winds, right? So a day like this is going to be a day where you're going to get a lot of migration. And this is the same day that I just showed you, the cold front, stationary front, warm front, south winds here, okay, coming across the Gulf of Mexico, okay? So one of the things that I started doing, I was working with some of the Cornell folks on this, and I just started plotting up winds at the altitudes that birds migrate. I thought, well, let me see what this looks like. So this is for that time period that I was just showing you. And it really was interesting because at the lower altitudes, around the high pressure's over here, so you got south winds, that's where these arrows, the winds are coming from the south. This is in meters per second. So if you double that, you have knots. So this is 22 meters per second, which is about 44, 45 knots, about 50 miles an hour. So you got 50 mile an hour winds at the altitudes that birds would migrate, coming right from the Yucatan Peninsula. A lot of birds will come up here and then they cross the Gulf. And they just take a ride in the wind. That's exactly right. They take a ride in the wind. So I saw this data. I'm like, oh, that's really interesting. So I took a cross section across this. Well, here's another one. This is up at 5,000 feet, same thing. So this is about same thing, about 40 to 50 mile an hour winds between 2,000 and 5,000 feet. And that's the altitudes that they migrate at. Then if we go, I believe I have, then we go up higher and the winds are not as strong. It's kind of interesting. It's called what we call is a low level jet stream. And again, the atmosphere is a it's fluid dynamics. It's governed by hydrodynamics, Navier-Stokes equations, and all that stuff. You probably know all about that. Right? Remember Navier-Stokes, engineer, right? Very complex. I won't go through it because you'll be here all night and you'll miss the space station. We don't want to do that. But so I did it. I figured, and this is up even higher up. So what's interesting is we have this low-level jet stream, and it's warm air moving north, so it's stable. So it's laminar flow, right? It's lighter, so it's going above the cooler air below. And if you're ever in laminar flow in an airplane, it's a nice ride, okay? So again, I just already showed this. The warm air goes over the cold air, and it's stable, smooth flying, okay? So, but one of the things that I've noticed, and this is something that I've worked with Cornell on, is I noticed, and I never understood, but a lot of our bird species in May and April arrive in Minnesota and the upper Midwest before they arrive here. And I was like, well, wow, that's kind of weird. Why is that? Well, it turns out in the springtime, we often have the oceans are still cold in the spring. We often keep high pressure from the Appalachians east, right? So what this does is it amplifies the low-level jet west of the Appalachians. So the birds are riding these jets, and they're getting further north, west of the Appalachians than they are east. So we have a lot of arrivals of certain species of birds will happen, up in, like, they'll get species in Minnesota that we won't see for another week. And Minnesota's further north, but it's because of the winds, and we never really understood that. Now we do. Now we do. And this is a cross-section of across the Gulf of Mexico, okay? Looking north, okay? Looking north, and these are the winds, okay? And this, I believe that's in knots, okay? I think so. Yes, it's in knots. So that's close to a mile. It's about 40 to 50 miles per hour. So if you look at this, so if we go up in altitude, this is around 1,000 to 2,000 feet. This is about 3,000 feet up to 5,000 feet. So right in this area is where the strongest winds are, and then the winds weaken, not that much, but they weaken some with height. So if you think about it, if you're a little songbird, you're going to fly up to the level that's comfortable for you, right? You're not going to want to be blown too far, and you're not going to want to have enough. You're going to fly to the level that's comfortable for you, and you're just going to ride those winds north. Well, you're still going to flap your wings, but you don't have to use that much energy. And now with the new tech, like Drew was saying, with the incredible proliferation of technology, they're able to put these little MODIS satellite sensors and GPS on these little songbirds. They weren't able to do that before because they were too big and bird couldn't fly, right? And they have found that there are birds down in Central America that literally will take off, go right across the Gulf of Mexico, right to their breeding grounds in the Central Appalachians in one night. And they're riding these jet streams. There's another species of shorebird that they nest in the very high Arctic. It's called the semi-palmated sandpiper, right? And very abundant. And they winter on the northern coast of South America, and they put these transmitters on them. They have found that those birds will literally take off, fly all the way up to Hudson Bay, and then they stage at Hudson Bay for 2 or 3 weeks until the Arctic melts, and then they go up to the top.
How many round trips do some?
Oh, that's a good question. Some of these shorebirds can live 10, 15 years. And and songbirds, there's been certain songbirds that are very successful, can live 7 to 10 years. Most birds, unfortunately, have about 2 to 3 years, and that's it. But some of them happen, they're successful. Like certain, they've, when they do banding studies, they'll recapture a bird, like a songbird that's 7 years old. And it's like, wow, this bird's been back and forth to South America 7 times. I mean, that's much more than I've ever traveled in my life. And what's amazing, what's even more amazing about it, and this is what really fascinated me about birds when I was young, is the migration. That these birds are coming all the way from Central and South America, coming all the way up into our woods and then going back. And they found that the same birds come to your yard. They come back to the same exact location. Or they're young. Or they're young. They're just, they have, and they don't fully understand exactly why. And I am not an ornithologist by training, but it has something to do with the Earth's magnetic field, and there's some other things that I don't want to speak on because I just don't have the expertise. But like I have a lot of birds in my yard, obviously, and my wife always is on me for cutting the bushes. I'm like, no, they can't do that right now. The birds are nesting. Get out of yard work too, but hope she's not watching this live stream. But anyway, but I have a catbird that always nests in my front, and every year, catbird, gray catbird, and they winter southern U.S. to Central America, but he always comes back about the same day, and I have a feeling it's the same bird. And if it's not the same bird, it's one of its young. But they're there every year. Every year, and it's almost like clockwork, May 2nd, like clockwork. I'll get up and I'll be like, oh, I hear the catbird. Yay, he's back. He's still with me. He's still with me. He'll be with me until October, early, into October, and then he disappears. But a lot of birds come back. They have a homing instinct. They'll come back to the exact same spot. And they winter in the exact same spots, which is interesting. So I think birds are using this, and this has not been documented yet. I want to document this because I think it's a theory. It's just my hypothesis. It's just my hypothesis, and it's something that I've talked to ornithologists about, and they're interested in it. But again, I'm still running the Weather Service in Binghamton. But when I retire someday, I want to get into some research related to this, and I'm going to do that. So, but I think there's something going on here with that. So, all right. So this just shows how cold front goes through. I think am I going backwards? All right. So, oh yeah, I already talked about it. Like I said, I talk about stuff and then I show it. This is the Tennessee warbler, which is a bird that nests in the boreal forests of Canada, and they migrate through the United States. Well, these are April arrivals, and look how far north the majority of them get. This is the eBird program, which if you're a birder, you got to use eBird. But they get further north here than they've actually reached all the way up to almost Minnesota before they've gotten even into the Carolinas. And that's that southerly wind that I was talking about. All right, so we'll move on. Let's go to fall migration now, okay? It's the opposite. Cold front passes by, the winds come out of the northwest, and birds start coming south. So this is a fall migration pattern. So you can see the same thing. After the cold front goes by, the winds turn to the north, and you get these bird blossoms, as we call them. They're not, as meteorologists, we know they're not, we know it's not precipitation, but you'll see that very frequently. So fall migration is a little bit different, though. As you can see, the birds are all coming from the northwest towards the coast. So if you're a birder, like I am, in the fall, that's the best time to be along the coast. In the spring, right around here is good, and in the Midwest is good. The coastal areas, it's slow. It's slow. It's the fall is when you want to go down to the coastal areas, at least in my opinion. They got good birds in the spring too, but I've been to Cape May, New Jersey in the fall, and oh my gosh, you sit there, and in the morning, you get there before sunrise. You got to be an early riser if you like birds. So if you like to sleep in, I had a hard time with that when I was a teenager, but I still forced myself out of bed. Now I get up early. But like in New Jersey is interesting because the geography in New Jersey, it goes to that little point where Cape May is, right? So on the north winds, all the birds are migrating down. They won't go over the ocean, as you can see, right? So all these birds are migrating down New Jersey. At first light, it's time for them to come down, and then they find themselves getting bottlenecked at the very southern tip of New Jersey, and there's this place called Higbee Beach, and there's a bunch of woods there, right? And these are birds that nest in the woods, so they need trees. So you stand on this dike, and literally you could see the birds coming, and the sky just fills with birds. And in good conditions, I've had as many as 2,000 to 3,000 warblers just passing by, and they've counted incredible numbers of birds. And what's amazing is these birds, you're on this dike, and the woods are below you because you're up on this dike. And the birds, they're just trying to get in the woods, and they'll fly right by you, like literally, and they'll land in the reeds at your feet. It's an absolute spectacle. It is just amazing. So, again, it's just, the fall migration is just incredible. Big nocturnal flights occur after cold fronts pass and high pressure builds in. So right there. So like tonight. Oh, and then the other thing. So this is, I've been basically talking about songbirds, okay? So, songbirds go at night. One type of bird that migrates during the day are swallows. The swallows, the purple martins and tree swallows, barn swallows, cliff swallows, rough-winged swallows, bank swallows. There's a whole bunch of different types of swallows. They migrate during the day, we found out. This is something I found out maybe 5-6 years ago. Dr. Ken Rosenberg was doing a study on that. He's from Cornell. And they found that swallows migrate during the day, but they go at 10,000 feet. And I was just like, And they were puzzled by that. And I was like, well, wait a minute. Thermal, so there's a reason for that, okay? So when we talk about fall migration, and even spring migration, during the day, these are all hawks, by the way. These are all hawks migrating. These are mostly broadwing hawks. There's a few other species mixed in there. But they ride on the thermals. So they take the thermals up. They go to the top of the thermal, and then they glide off the thermal to the next thermal. And they ride up the thermal, and they head their way up very slowly north. So thermals are really important. So they need sunshine, right? Well, the top of the thermals, generally in the fall, and even in the spring, 6,000 to 8,000 feet. They don't get to 10,000 feet. So the swallows have learned that they go above the hawks. Instead of migrating at night, they go above the hawks. And if you ever look at radar early in the morning, you ever see those rings that pop up around Montezuma and other? If you look at the radar in the morning, especially August, September, you will see these little rings. Those are swallows taking off. And I've been at Montezuma for that spectacle, and it was just mind-blowing. Like, I got there before sunrise. Again, you got to get up early. Sometimes it's hard to get up, especially for Montezuma. I was up at like 4 a.m. But anyway, I get up there, and I could hear some nocturnal migration. And as soon as the sun came up, the swallows are all roosting in the marshes, like millions of them. They were just everywhere. Then they all started taking off. And they were taking off. So I have a binocular spotting scope. And after a while, I'm looking through my spotting scope, and I'm seeing all these swallows. But then I look, and I'm like, oh my God, they're even higher up. They were just everywhere. That's what our radar is seeing, and we are actually tracking them at 10,000 feet. So I talked to Dr. Rosenberg. I said, we're picking these up at 10,000 feet. And then that's where they kind of got onto that. So swallows migrate during the day. But the hawks use the thermals. So this is daytime migration in both the spring and the fall. So for us, most of our really good flights in the fall are after northwest winds with thermal activity. And the birds, they use the thermals. And the broadwing hawks are the ones that are the most abundant when it comes to this. They like to go on these big flocks like this. And I've seen this, and it blows your mind. And of course, there's an eagle, and other different species will mix in there with them, which is kind of cool. So again, I already explained this, but here's a thermal. The air goes up, then they get to the top of the thermal, then they drop, then they go up, and they drop. So again, they're going up the thermal, and then they glide to the next up, and then they work their way down. Okay. So that's how hawks use weather. In spring, though, it's different. sun angle is higher in spring and fall. The thermals do reach greater heights. They do. They don't get to 10,000 feet, though. They don't get to 10,000 feet. Affects especially the broad-winged hawk migration. Broad-winged hawks, everybody see any hawks? You know, like most people are familiar with red-tailed hawks, probably, right? Broad-winged hawks are the ones that sit in the woods. They like to be in the woods, and they feed on toads and frogs and other, you know, and snakes and other little things like that. But a lot of times they don't soar very much once they reach their breeding grounds. They just stay in the woods. And they have done some studies on these birds, and literally where they nest, they'll stay within 5 to 10 acres, and where they winter, same thing. They stay in a very, very small radius, but then they migrate these huge distances. So, but what happens sometimes is in the spring, the thermals reach such a greater height, and it's south winds, right? And a lot of times there's no clouds when it comes, because we don't have a lot of moisture yet. So they take these south winds north, and you can't see them. So a lot of times they go by undetected, except Lake Ontario, Derby Hill, Braddock Bay. That's where I've seen, oh yeah, oh, those places are phenomenal. Love those places. Oh, I want to go. It's not time yet, but anyway, so talking about, yeah, I already have it, Derby Hill and Braddock Bay. They're the best East Coast spring hawk watch sites. One other thing I like to say, in November and December, the thermals do taper off because the sun angle is getting lower. That's when the eagles start coming south, the golden eagles. We are very fortunate that we are along a golden eagle migratory pathway. Golden eagles nest up in Canada, and they fly down the Appalachians, and they actually winter a little bit around here. We had one up near Whitney Point wintered the entire, I don't know if you saw that bird, but yeah, it was an immature. But they stayed up right up by the reservoir all winter long, and they wintered generally down the Appalachians. But they don't use thermals, and they just use the stronger winds in November. So the winds come from the northwest, and then if you look at the Appalachians, there's a 90-degree angle, so it gives them uplift, and they just come straight south. But in the spring, Derby Hill and Braddock Bay and I'll explain why. Okay, so you get strong southwest winds, right? So you got thermals over the land. And a lot of times these thermals are a little bit higher than they would be in the you know, because the sun angle is higher in the spring. And then the thermals, there's no thermals in the spring over Lake Ontario. Lake Ontario is cold, right? So the thermals collapse. So here's thousands of hawks coming north, and then all of a sudden their thermals are gone. They drop. They literally drop. So you're sitting there, and you'll just see a whole, it looks like a swarm of bees coming at you. And they're all hawks coming right at you. And they will not go over the water. So what they do then is they just fly along the edge of the shore until they can get the thermals again, and then they head up into Canada. So it is an absolute spectacle, but you have to have the right weather conditions. You can't just go up the Derby Hill on a north wind day in spring. You'll see nothing. So that's why weather is so important when it comes to some of this stuff. And I've learned to take advantage of knowing about the weather, and so I know when it's time to go to Derby Hill. I know when it's time to go to Cape May because I know the weather. And I've been teaching a lot of my birding friends this. So this is what I was talking about. Thermals, maybe 6,000 feet, and there is no thermals here. So the hawks are way up here, and all of a sudden it's like, wait a minute. And they drop, and it's right where they have Derby Hill and Braddock Bay too as well. Right? And there's probably other spots there too that are, but it's just and you're not just talking about broad-winged hawks, you're talking about all different types of hawks, eagles, osprey. They get some rare hawks from the west, in the south. It's just incredible. And sometimes you'll get even some seabirds, pelicans, and some other rare birds that just are migrating. So it's just an amazing place, and it's not that far from here. So again, I've talked about this already. Northwest winds. This is later in the season, in November, December. So the golden eagles will take advantage of these northwest winds and just go right down the Appalachian Mountains. And we are right in a flyway. So I love seeing golden eagles. We have bald eagles everywhere now, which is just phenomenal. I love bald eagles. When I was a child and just getting into birding, you didn't see any. And the old timers, I mean, I was in the Audubon Society, and back then they were pretty strict. You had to be 18, and I was only 10, but they let me be an honorary member. So I was like, oh, thank you. You know, they were very strict. I'm thinking like nowadays it's like a kid is interested in birds. No, you got to be 18. But anyway, they, you know, I mean, you think about it. You know, you want to encourage people, but that's just how it was. Those were the bylaws. But they let me attend meetings, and they were very nice to me. They let me. But the old timers in that club said that, boy, when, you know, back in the 40s and 30s, we used to have bald eagles everywhere around here. They were all up and down the Susquehanna, all the way up to Nichols, and down to Towanda, and Binghamton, and Elmira. They were everywhere. We had none. In fact, I started birding seriously in the late 70s. I saw my first bald eagle in the wild in 1989. It took me that long to see an eagle, one eagle, all right? Now I go to Whitney Point Dam, and sometimes I have 6 of them soaring at the same time. You've probably seen that too, right? I mean, it's just, they're just almost like, oh, there's another eagle. And I don't want to say there's just another eagle, but they become so common that they're just, in fact, there's more eagles up there now than there are hawks.
And they winter there too because
Yes.
it doesn't ever freeze in the middle.
Well,
Or
you know what it is? It's what is it? Where the dam is released, that water keeps flowing. They like that spot right around the bridge at Whitney Point. So if you look, you'll see them just sitting in the trees there. So, yeah, they like open water. So, I think my mic fell. No, it didn't. Okay. All right, moving right along here. All right, so vagrancy. Let's talk a little bit about vagrancy. I have no idea how I'm doing on time. How am I doing on time?
You're fine.
Oh, okay.
15 minutes.
Okay. Oh, I'm doing good. Okay, so let's talk about vagrancy. What is vagrancy? It is birds that just are out of place. They're not supposed to be. And that makes birding exciting because we get rare birds. Like we had it was right around Christmas, I don't know if you saw, we had a Townsend's warbler, which is a warbler of the West Coast that winters down in Mexico. And Christmas Eve, I was over in Endicott, and I found one. I was just like, oh my gosh, and half the state birders came to see it. But it just was a vagrant. It ended up here on the East Coast. So birds occasionally do stuff like that. So here's an example with Hurricane Sandy. What they found, and I thought this was phenomenal. We have trajectory analysis. So you can actually take a bird, or you take where birds have been seen and do backward trajectories. So if a bird is seen, now we use this mainly for chemical spills, like where is the gases going to go, but I was like, we could probably use this for what the winds are going to do. So what happened was Hurricane Sandy came the end of October in early November of 2012, okay? And after the storm passed, all these birds, and this is like a magnolia warbler, that's a indigo bunting, and a bay-breasted warbler. These birds, by November, they're gone. They're down, way down south. They're on their way to their wintering grounds, right? They were showing up in the Northeast, and this, I forgot which bird this was, but a bird, like I think it was a magnolia warbler, shows up in western New York, and it's like, what the heck is this bird doing here? They're and they found a bunch of different songbirds that should be gone. It wasn't just one. It wasn't a one-off. It was a bunch. So we ran backwards trajectories, and it turned out what happened was Hurricane Sandy came in. They got caught. When Hurricane Sandy came up and looped around, they got caught in Hurricane Sandy, and they go to the eye where the winds are light, and they just stay, because they don't want to go in the strong winds, or they'll die. So they got transported. So these poor birds migrated south, got transported back north, and then they had to do it all over again. So this is where we started using trajectories, and this was our thought. This was back in 2012. We're like, oh my gosh, we could use trajectories to, air, and this is the airflow. So this is this is a model that we run, because if there's like a hazardous chemical spill, we can tell where the materials are going to go, and that helps public safety officials evacuate people. So we're using these. And then this was a more of a climate, a short-term climate thing that we had. So this is a bird that I wasn't very familiar with before 2012. It's called the northern lapwing. It is a shorebird that nests in northern Europe, and they're supposed to migrate south this way towards Africa, right? Well, in the fall of 2012, we had numerous reports of northern lapwings in the northeast United States. Wow, that's like, what the heck is going on here? So I'm looking, and I found that we had, this is what is called the North Atlantic Oscillation. We had very strong high pressure, anomalously strong high pressure over the North Atlantic. Normally there's big storms in the North Atlantic, right? Well, the winds were going in the opposite direction. Like if this was a low pressure, the winds would be going counterclockwise, so you have a westerly wind. So these birds, why would they want to go into a westerly wind across the ocean to the United States? No, they're going to go south. Well, this was an anomalous year where we had high pressure up here, and it was dominant. That's an easterly wind. So we did trajectories, and guess what? It brought them all into North America. So, and this was a big invasion of these birds. So I went back, and so one thing I want to do is go back in time, and we've started looking at this. But other times where we've had this pattern it has to be right when they're migrating, to see other times where these birds occasionally show up, and we're finding that it's related to the North Atlantic Oscillation. So we can predict vagrancy, which is kind of cool. That's exciting for bird watchers, like, woo, So, but it's interesting because it shows how the weather and the birds are using the weather, And the fact that I like both, I can put them together, and it's just phenomenal for me. And this is where Birdcast came out of. So I worked with Cornell, and back in the late 2000s, I was sending them all the wind data, and they were using that to predict what species of birds would be arriving. So I was involved with the very, very initial stages of Birdcast, and I will show you Birdcast. So let me go back. All right, so this is an example of Birdcast. So I picked a day in, what did I pick? I picked May 12th. So peak migration, this is for Broome County, 221,000 birds in flight at this time at 12 a.m., and we had over 1 million birds cross the county that night. And it's estimated from radar. And the winds too, and everything. And they also try to give you an idea of what species are migrating. And again, this is so much more advanced than it was when I started with it. But they have the altitude, the mean altitude they're flying, and how many. And last spring there were more birds. This is average. So you can see we had more birds last spring coming north, which is good. And it tells you when it peaked and then when it dropped off. So this is Birdcast. So it's just called birdcast.info. Let me go back. There it is, birdcast.info. And it just, all you do is you could put your state, county in here, and it's inactive. They don't start till August 1st. But I'll bet you anything. Is it dark yet? It's getting the sunset, right? Oh yeah. All right. So let me see if we got any birds migrating tonight. So I'll go in. I'll bet you we do. Oh yeah, here we go. Now watch. The sun is setting, and look. Watch the sun sets. Boom. You can start seeing the birds are taking off. It's happening right now. See that? So if I zoom this out a little bit, let me go back. Let me go to the continental sector. Oh no, we don't want that. Yeah, that'll work. So we're in the CONUS. Now, some birds are going in the day, but watch how along the East Coast here. Boom. And I think last night, if I go back further, think last night was a big night, so let me go back about, let me change this to 12. All right, so let's see what we got here. Yeah, that was last night. So watch, see all these birds? Sun rises, they go down. So that was last night. So if I go to 200, you can see a lot. So this is that cold front going through. The birds are migrating through the plains. Last night there was a big push. And then currently, if you look at our radar, this is, I'll go to the Binghamton radar. So you'll be able to see the birds taking off. Yep. But notice how the echoes are light, and then they're starting to, that's songbirds starting to take off. Isn't that amazing? So we're seeing it right now. And during nights where there's low cloud ceilings, where birds fly lower, you could actually hear them. You could hear them.
And they're going north?
No, they're heading south. They're heading south already. Trying to say.
Dave, could you confirm that that little wedge at the bottom is Kopernik?
You know what? We found out it isn't.
It isn't. Oh, I was telling people it was.
There's a little hill just south of the airport. That's what it is.
Oh, okay.
I always thought it was you guys. It's not.
Well,
So you guys are fine. Yeah, that's that. We're hitting a little hill just south of the radar. So that's where the noise comes from. But yeah, so you're seeing the beginnings of some bird migration here. All right, so let me move on here. Yeah, I gotta get moving. I'm almost done. Again, like I say, I like to just talk, and the slides just help me along. So climate change and birds. These 4 species of birds, again, that's one of my favorite birds, the cardinal. Very common, but I have a special thing for cardinals. Cardinals, tufted titmice, Carolina wren, red-bellied woodpecker. You go back 100 years, they're rare up here. They're rare, very rare. They were a southern bird. They got up maybe to the Mason-Dixon line, southern, Maryland, southern PA. And the warming in the 20th century has allowed these birds to head north. I mean, the Carolina wren, they're all over the place now, and they continue to slowly work north. So all of these birds are now common in upstate New York, where 100 years ago, 150 years ago, they were rare. So climate change has definitely affected these birds in a positive way, really. Temperatures have gone up. I don't have to go through all this. We know there's been some climate change, but these birds are heading north. Now, Audubon has this, and I'm not going to go through all this, but Audubon has, like, what does additional warming mean and how it will affect species. And I'll be honest with you, I've looked through this. I don't agree with everything on it. There's certain birds on here that I'm like, it doesn't add up to me. So it's not 100%, but it does give you some idea that there are certain species that could be vulnerable. Especially the birds that are most vulnerable, in my opinion, would be the birds that nest in the boreal forests of the Catskills, Adirondacks, and Green and White Mountains, because if it warms, that habitat just goes away. And there's a species of thrush called bignell's thrush that is endemic to the Northeast. So if the climate warms too much, they'll go extinct. So they're actually, I don't think they're in danger. I think they're on the threatened list. They're very common right now. But if things continue to warm and we lose the boreal forests in the Green, White Mountains, and Catskills, Adirondacks, then it's going to be a problem. So, but Audubon has a whole thing on that, and I'm not going to go through that. It's just a lot, and I don't want to bore you guys. And I'm going to finish up with, what time is it? Let's see here. Okay, I'm doing good. 9:45, right? Okay. It's 9:31 right now. Some of the things that I'm a little concerned about, and I'm going to probably depart from, and maybe somebody will disagree with me, and that's fine. I'm a little worried about some of this green energy that I'm seeing. Proliferation of solar farms has me worried. I mean, if you look in Shenango County, just if you go towards Shenango Valley State Forest, or State Park, and you drive on Route 12 there, and you look off to the left, they cut down like a couple hundred acres of trees and put a solar farm in there. Are you kidding me? That's habitat that's gone. Our footprint is already big enough, right? The biggest threat to birds is loss of habitat. And yet Audubon and all these other are supporting all this. I disagree with it. Because that was once a forest that had a lot of birds in it. Now it's just solar panels. And they're starting to do this all over the Northeast. Field birds. Field birds will not nest where there's solar panels. And field birds are in peril in the Northeast because we're losing all our farms. And the farming practices are so clean now that every inch they use, and they use pesticides. Farm birds are really, field birds are really struggling. And now we're putting up solar panels on these farmers' fields. So I really have an issue with this. I'm sorry. And I really don't want the forest. I don't want them to be taking down the forest. Now there are some attempts to make bird-friendly solar farms, but you know what? A lot of these companies, they don't care. They just want to make money. Some of them are good, and they'll plant native flowers for pollinators, and that's wonderful. That's wonderful. I'll go with that. But it's not every company's like that. It's all about money, and I'm a little annoyed with that. So I'm really worried. So this is the one in Minnesota where they have they have actually native plants for pollinators for the bees and everything. That's a good project. I worry a little bit, because I don't know. It can be done in a decent way, and I'm really worried about wind farms. Sorry, I think wind farms are really bad. Birds collide with a lot of things at night, especially songbirds. They collide with towers, they'll collide with turbines, but songbirds breed rapidly. Like their average lifespan is like 3 years, 2.5, 3 years. So an individual songbird might produce 10 or 12 young in their, before they die. So they breed pretty rapidly. So they can, we've had towers for 50, 60 years. Bird populations have been fine, I'm worried about the hawks and the eagles. Hawks and eagles, they look down and sideways. They don't look up because nobody's going after them. Songbirds, they're looking everywhere, right? And they find that eagles and hawks, they don't look down and they'll get hit with these blades. And they're putting them all down the Appalachians, right along the flight lines. They just put that one up in Sanford, right along the golden eagle migratory pathway. And the Delaware, Otsego, Audubon fought New York State DEC and they blew them off. So I'm really annoyed by that. It's like, and Altamont Pass in California has killed so many eagles. And it's very frustrating to me. But if you look at bird populations overall, I'm just going to have just a few. Red-eyed vireo is one of the most abundant birds in the eastern forest. Their numbers are going up. Ovenbirds, pretty stable. Black-Burnian warbler, beautiful bird, pretty stable or going up. So a lot of our songbirds are doing pretty well. The ones that nest in the forests, the one that nests in the fields, we're losing our fields because everything's reverting back to forest. If you go back 100, 150 years, we didn't have that many forests. We had a lot of fields. So all these birds from the Midwest came east where they had breeding ground. And our forest birds were declined, okay? Now the forests have returned, so a lot of our forest birds are coming back. Birds need habitat. I know Dr. Ken Rosenberg, he's in charge of conservation science for the lab and for Audubon. And he's the director of that. And he said the biggest thing is habitat for birds. The biggest thing. But really worried about the wind farms because what happens is these, golden eagles especially. Now they found in Europe if they paint one blade black, the birds can actually see them. So they get less collisions, 71% less. But guess what? It's not approved by the FCC. They have to go through the whole approval all the red tape in the United States. They can't do that right now. Because I've been in touch with the Sanford people, and they say, oh, we can't do that because that's not approved yet in the United States. So you got red tape to go through. So this is a map, and I'm almost done. This is a map that, oops, I did that again, but at least it goes back, of where all the wind farms are concentrated, okay? And now we have a patch there too. And this area is the Golden Eagle pathway. This Franklin Mountains there, big hawk watch, and they keep good records of populations. and this is near Duluth, and birds come down this way. And again, these birds are migrating through this each year, and they're migrating through this each year. And the good news, and I have some good news, is if you look at the populations at Franklin Mountain, even though we've had these wind farms putting in, their numbers are going up still. So I don't think they've affected them yet. So maybe there is a chance that it won't be as bad as I'm worried about. Bald eagles, of course, their numbers are going way up. If we go out to Hawk Ridge and Duluth, same thing. Even though there's all those wind farms, and there's so many wind farms in the Midwest, even so, the golden eagle numbers are up. So there's at least something there, and of course, bald eagles are up. So green energy just needs to be bird friendly. And the sighting's critical. Hopefully they'll use some new technologies, and technology will evolve. So I've seen some that don't have blades and they just spin really fast. And I hope that the technology evolves, because we don't want to wipe out our birds to have clean energy. I mean, that's just crazy. So that's all I have. So I'll answer. I think I have a few minutes.
Well, actually, believe it or not, the ISS is in fact above the horizon now.
Okay.
So actually what we'll do is we're going to pause now. We'll just head out to view the ISS. It's actually going to be an overhead pass, and then we can come back in, and if you'd like to answer some questions, we can do that then.
I'll answer questions.
All right.
I'll be happy to do that.
All right, so let's head out.
Take a
We're
break,
going
and
to go right out toward the main parking lot.
There you go. Got it done just in time.
All right, we are back, and Dave, if you want, if your mic is, yeah, just turn it all the way on, and all right. So,
Forgot, sir.
So you were saying some of these birds migrate from South America to North America
Mm-hmm.
one night.
actually, hold on a second. Let me just get you on the mic here so that people can hear you. Who was asking the question? All right, here we go.
So you were saying some of these birds migrate from South America to North America in one night. What kind of speed are we talking about here?
Well, it depends on the winds, but probably 30, 40 miles per hour. I mean, they're in the air a long time. Birds, and again, I didn't go over this, but birds double their body weight. I mean, you imagine doubling your body weight? I mean, a lot, right? But they do. They double their body weight before they migrate, okay? So they use those fat reserves. But I think they use the winds to help conserve energy. And a lot of times, and that's why staging areas, those are migratory stop-offs, are critical habitat along the East Coast for like shorebirds, along the Gulf Coast, woodlands for our birds that breed in the woods are really important because the birds need to refuel. And sometimes, like I've noticed, like with shorebirds, these are birds that nest in the Arctic and winter down where you're saying in South America. And what I've noticed is they'll come north and they'll stop, in one of our areas near Whitney Point or some, and the same birds will be there for up to 2 weeks. So they're just refueling and then they take off.
Yep.
So they need that.
So, get another question over here.
What about birds that don't migrate? What about birds that don't migrate, like the robins, I assume they don't because they seem to be always here. What do you?
What about, oh yeah, there are some birds that don't migrate, yes. Cardinals are generally, it's interesting though, the majority of them don't migrate, but there has been instances, I had a bird watching friend who unfortunately has passed, but he was studying seabirds and he was on one of our NOAA ships offshore. He saw a cardinal and it landed on the ship, like 100 miles south of New England. And it was just like, what the heck is this bird doing here? So the bird was migrating.
It's resting.
But the bird, yeah, it needed to rest, but what was it doing there? We don't think, so I think there are some movements, some birds, but most cardinals do not migrate. Robins do migrate. Oh yeah. And the thing with robins are, the ones that we are seeing now that are nesting in our yards and everything, they'll winter in the southern United States. But the ones that we see in the winter, they nest up in central and northern Canada, and they winter down here. So they're different birds. Yeah, yeah.
Any other question? Oh, one over here.
Why is it that the hawks in particular use the thermals?
They're built for it. They have those big wings, and they just, I mean, think about it, they're adapted for that purpose. So they have their wing area, and it just, thermals, all you gotta do is just put their, and then they ride the thermals. It's really fascinating to see that. And I recommend if you're interested in birds, and you have a good southwest wind day, it's got to be mid to late April. You got to have the timing right. Go up to Derby Hill or go up to Braddock Bay, and it's just incredible what they see up there. To see 2,000 hawks in the air at one time, it's pretty exciting. But yes, it's just they have those the big wings, and they use the thermals. Yeah, and they've adapted. The evolutionary, and again, birds migrate, and again, they're trying to figure out why birds migrate, but they think the primary reason was, all the glaciations that we've had, because a lot of our bird species are up to, a couple million years old. They've been through 20 different glaciations. That's why I don't worry about birds and climate change as much. Now, some I do. But the majority of them, they've been through so much climate change, they're still with us. I mean, maybe it's different this time, I don't know, but it's like we've had some roller coaster years, and we've had some really significant climate change in the last 2 million years with at least 20 different glaciations, and these species of birds are still around. So there's hope when it comes to that. Try to be optimistic, okay?
Okay, we have a question from the live stream chat from Linda.
Okay.
It says, where do our red-winged blackbirds migrate? I had one 2 springs in a row at the feeders. The same bird named him Hoppy because he had a damaged leg.
Oh, okay.
But do
Okay.
red-winged blackbirds migrate?
Yes. Red-winged blackbirds, generally, the majority of them, and they're another one of these birds that, the ones that nest here, they go down to the south, and they form these enormous flocks, millions, and then they come back in February, March. And then the ones that we may have in the wintertime, they go up into Canada.
So I have a question. You're talking about obviously you can see these birds migrating on the radar. I'm wondering, they seem like when you see those large, like Canada geese that will fly, migrate in these big, big V's.
Right.
Can you actually see that V on the
Not
radar?
really,
Not really?
no. What we're seeing are songbirds,
Interesting.
mostly. What we're seeing are songbirds. Now, they have documented some hawk flights really close to the Lake Ontario shoreline.
Mm-hmm.
But as far as like one flock of geese on radar, it just doesn't have enough power.
Okay.
But when you have thousands and thousands of birds flying over, and they're all made of water, they're all mostly water, the radar is picking them up.
Interesting. Okay. Another question back here.
You mentioned how hurricanes can alter the migratory patterns and send the birds completely where they don't want to be.
Mm-hmm.
So that got me thinking, do you know if hurricanes over the ocean would have that same effect underwater on any migratory fish species?
Yeah, I didn't have time, but there's this thing called hurricane birding. Hurricane birding. So what birders will do is, if you have a hurricane, right, all these birds and there are millions of birds that they live they live on the ocean, and they feed on the ocean. They don't come inland. So these hurricanes form, and the birds don't want to be in the wind, so they go into the eye, right? The eye comes ashore, and they get deposited land. And then what do they look for? They look for lakes, they look for bodies of water. So birders will flock to those I didn't mean that, but birders will, didn't mean that pun, but no, birders will go to these places, and they'll see all these incredible birds that are normally out in the middle of the ocean. In fact, when Hurricane Sandy came up through here, we had they're called, God, I can't remember the name, Fee's Storm Patrol, I think that's the name of it. It's a type of little bird like this that feeds on the ocean surface. And these birds, I think I got the wrong species. They're storm patrols. They were all over the Finger Lakes, and they were all over the place. So it was amazing. I was up at Myers Point, and because I heard about it, I said, I got to go up and see this, because I've never seen one of these before. I haven't been out in the middle of the ocean, So I'm up there, and there's about 30 other birders up there from Cornell, and we all were watching these birds, and it was incredible, because you never see them. But what they do is they follow the eye, and it just deposits them inland. Unfortunately, I think the unfortunate thing that happened to those birds is they're not used to predators. So, and a few days after that, there was all these pictures of peregrine falcons coming down and taking these poor birds. It was just like, oh, this is horrible, but it is what it is. It's Mother Nature, it just is what it is. But yeah, you're right, the bird. So if we get a big hurricane that comes through, and the remnants come through, it will deposit seabirds, and I'm telling you, birders will come from all over to see the birds, and it is pretty interesting. That's a good question.
All right, any other questions here? Oh no, head back here. Hold on one.
Just a quick question. You spoke about the field birds, okay, being affected by that. What are field birds? different than songbirds?
No, they're songbirds, but they
Okay.
all right, so they nest. Their habitat is the fields.
Okay.
Meadowlarks, like eastern meadowlark, Savannah sparrow, Vesper sparrow, grasshopper sparrow, bobolinks, all those, they nest in the fields. And they rely on the fields. And if you go back 400 years before we settled the Northeast, they probably weren't here because they were out in the plains where there's fields, right? And when they chopped all the trees down and brought all the farming into the Northeast, those birds spread east. But now everything's reverting back to forest, and the farming practices are not conducive, and those birds are really in decline. So, but you like bobolinks? They're pretty. I like them too.
Oh, another question.
I have a question about birdcast, and
Okay.
if it looks like there's, because they'll predict activity for that evening, right? And if it looks like it's going to be a good amount of birds that are moving, will songbirds always stop early in the morning then, or if
Yeah, they
if
land
have
early in the morning.
If they, I mean, if the wind is good, they won't continue on.
If they're
during
over the
day.
Gulf of Mexico, they'll continue
They'll
on.
continue.
Because they got
But
no place
over
to
our
land.
area, they
over
won't.
our
Okay.
area, they'll
Okay.
they'll land.
Okay.
They'll land. And the one thing that in the fall, especially, which is coming up soon, which is really interesting, is like a lot of the thrushes migrate in the fall, and they're very vocal when they migrate. And there's species of thrush, Swainson's thrush, veer, wood thrush, hermit thrush. And what happens, what I like to do is I'll get up before sunrise, which gotta get up early. If you like birds, you gotta get up early. I get up before sunrise, and you could hear the birds. And I can see the radar, so I see all the birds, and they're migrating. Then I start seeing the migrating, the bird echoes are decreasing, and then all of a sudden I'm starting to hear their call notes. And I have literally had, especially when there's low clouds, I have had some of these migrating birds go right over I mean, I could see them flying by because I'm on top of a hill. So, yeah, they will land during the day, and when they land, what's incredible, like this one species of thrush, Swainson's thrush, which I know you've seen, they'll be all over the place. I mean, you'll be hearing thousands of them up there, but then after sunrise, you can't find any of them. They hide. I think what they're doing is they hide and they rest for a while, and then they'll forage, but they're very hard to find during the day. But they're there. I know they're there because I heard them. They landed. But it's so hard as a birder to actually see one because they're so, they're just trying to rest, and they don't want to get eaten, because there's predators everywhere. So, yeah. So they do land.
I have a question.
Sure.
I was in a choir tour, and I took a slow boat to Europe, and with my choir director, and he was in the Navy. He said that there are hundreds of different kinds of seagulls. Is that true?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, there are tons of gulls.
I didn't realize there were so
enormous amount
many.
of different species and very interesting
Yeah.
species. I love gulls.
Do they migrate too?
Oh, yeah.
All
they're,
of them.
they're migratory, yeah.
Thank you.
Some of them are very highly migratory. Oh, yeah. Yep.
Are there any books on it?
Oh, yeah. Just go on, Google it. Just gulls of North America, gulls. I mean, I've got about 4 different books. Tons of books on gulls. Yeah.
Oh, another one.
One of my pet peeves is that some idiot years ago introduced the starlings to this country. Do you actually see them in their flocks on the radar? Can you tell that it's starlings rather than something else?
Not really. There're just not enough of them.
Yeah.
But the interesting thing about the starlings is their numbers are plummeting.
Yeah.
They're dropping. I mean, there's still a lot of them.
Oh, yeah.
But when I was a kid, there was way more. But for some reason, they don't know fully why. And again, I'm not an ornithologist. I haven't studied this. But their numbers are really declining. And then a house sparrow, the same thing. Those
Same
house
thing,
sparrows, their numbers are really coming down too. So maybe it's getting to a point where they overpopulated and now they're coming down, which is actually good because starlings and house sparrows are aggressive towards our native birds.
And they are invasive.
And they're invasive, exactly, invasive
As I
species.
understand it, they're the only 2 birds that we're by the federal government allowed to just shoot
Yep.
indiscriminately.
Yep, and you know what? I like birds, but you can shoot them. I don't
And
care.
I do, and I
Good.
do.
Because honestly, they harm our native birds.
They are terrible for the bluebird.
Exactly,
because
and I
they eat the
love
babies,
bluebirds.
They eat the eggs.
But I will tell you, the bluebird populations from when I was a child to now have just exploded. They're everywhere. It's really nice to see.
We have a place down in Brackney, just over the state line,
Okay.
and we have all kinds of birds, and so we just, while we feed them, but we just don't even have to watch them. One other thing I wanted to ask, are you familiar with Hawk Mountain down in central
Oh, yeah.
Pennsylvania?
I've been there. It's another great hawk watch
Is it?
place. But Franklin Mountain's closer. And I'll be honest with you, I have found that all you really need is just a good lookout to the northwest, and you can see a lot of hawks. It's just the areas where they concentrate, like Derby Hill and Braddock Bay. Hawk Mountain is pretty good because they have a lot of observers up there. But if you're good at identifying hawks, I go to a spot just up at Whitney Point, where you overlook the reservoir. That spot, I could just sit there, look off to the northwest, and I see lots of hawks migrating. So,
We had a Girl Scout troop do a couple of bluebird nesting boxes
Oh, good.
that I have put up right outside my window.
good.
And it's very easy to get distracted when you see these little blue flashes going back and
Yeah.
forth. And
Well, it's the Bluebird Box program, and this is a nation. There's a lot of people involved that have really helped.
Yeah.
Plus, as much as it's awful to see all the trees dying, especially the ash trees that are all dying, bluebirds are cavity nesters.
yeah.
So there's going to be more cavities. So I think, and woodpecker numbers are really coming up. Because I've been watching birds 40 some years. There's more woodpeckers now than I've ever seen. It's because there's all these dead trees from the ashes that are dying, and it's sad to see the ash trees go, but the woodpeckers are really having a good time. So,
All right, well, Dave, thank you so much once again.
Thank you.
I mean, clearly you had us. And I
Thank
think
you.
pretty much everybody who went outside to watch the ISS came back in. So
and
thanks
I
again.
have to say thank you. That was awesome.
Oh.
So I want to give you
I didn't have a whole lot to do with it, other than knowing that where and when. it
well,
was
you
gonna
knew
come.
where it was,
Yep. And,
you got it set up.
So actually, for those people that are actually watching our live stream, that I mentioned earlier that our students are going to talk to the astronaut on the ISS, it will actually be live streamed on our YouTube channel.
Oh, wow.
So,
Excellent.
So you
Okay.
can see that, and like any of our programs, like tonight's program, will continue to be on our YouTube channel. So you can come back and you could go and listen to it, but you can go back and check out all of the other previous 3 or 4 years worth of live stream programs, and we really enjoy offering that. What's nice is it started sort of during COVID, and then people would be writing in their comments in the chat, and then when we finally could able to have people back here again, we actually got to finally meet those people that had been chatting on that. But we also have people literally from around the world. There's a woman who lives in Adelaide, Australia, that is watching it basically Saturday afternoon for her, and so it's been a great resource for us. G'day. All right, so thanks again. Next week we have Zoe Lerner-Pontario from Cornell's astronomy department talking about the next 10 years worth of space missions. We've got the Perseid meteor shower. We may be able to actually do a live stream of that. So we will, again, any clear night or even partially clear night will be open for that. And look forward to having you back. And also, we have a rule here that you can't leave Kopernik until you look through a telescope. So head on out and check out our scopes. Thanks.